All right, today I'm going to be going over the new buyer representation agreement, the new seller's payment to buyer broker form that we have to submit if we're going to be asking, or if the buyers are going to be asking the seller to pay their broker or you. I'm going to be going over the RPA, the change, the small change that we have to do in there, then also the new listing agreement. So I'm going to get right into it. I'm going to try to keep this short and fast. And it would probably be helpful if you had these forms in front of you. I know I'm going to have them up on the TV behind me, but maybe a little hard to see. So if you have the forms in front of you while I'm going through them, you can kind of go through it with me together, and you can highlight, leave notes, and yeah. So let's get into it. So the first one I'm going to cover is the buyer representation agreement. This is the main one that everyone is kind of freaking out about, and agents right now are all freaking out about this, but it's really simple, in my opinion. Like, the only big change are the forms. I don't think the practice is going to really change the way that we do things, the way that we get paid. It's not really going to change much, but the forms are, and so that's why people are kind of, I think they're overdoing it. But I'm going to make this really simple for you guys so you totally understand this. So let's get right into it. So the buyer representation and broker compensation agreement starts out just like every other form. You put the date that you're doing it, you put your buyer's name, you put your brokerage name, and that's paragraph 1. Paragraph 2, 2A, A1. So this is going to be for how long the agreement is going to be. So let me put it down here in the middle for you. So this section right here, so you have to put a beginning date and an ending date. And so right below that, it says that the term shall not exceed 3 months, so 90 days. So whatever the day is that you're probably going to have them sign this, that'll be the date that you put beginning. And then you can do it for 30, 60, 90, whatever you decide on. It just can't be more than 90. So let's just say we're going to do today, August 10th, and then we're going to do a 3-month long agreement. So we're just going to click over 3 months, 1, 2, 3, and we're going to put November 10th, right? So one thing to remember is that you can cancel these agreements at pretty much any time if you leave it as a non-exclusive. So we're going to talk about that. So the next section right here, type of representation, non-exclusive, all right? So this form automatically assumes that this is going to be a non-exclusive agreement. And so what that means is there has to be broker involvement in order for you to be entitled to compensation from this form. So we're going to explain what that is a little bit later. If you want to make this an exclusive agreement, so basically it means whether there's broker involvement or not, think like a listing agreement. The exclusive right to sell. If that seller goes and sells that house to somebody on their own without you knowing about it while it's under contract, well, they still have to give you that commission. So this would be the same thing, right? If it's an exclusive agreement and then they go look at new construction, right? This is where that would probably happen a lot. Or they go call another agent, the agent shows it, they write the offer. Well, if you had an exclusive agreement, you could be entitled to get your compensation. Non-exclusive agreement, if there was no broker involvement, you wouldn't be. So that is going to be the difference there. For my purposes, I'm going to wait to see kind of how this shakes out. We're going to go with the non-exclusive agreement, which is pretty much how it already works right now, right? How many times have you not done anything for the buyer and then were paid for that closing, for the house that they went, right? Pretty much every buyer you've probably ever worked with that you received a commission for, you probably showed them the house, or you ran comps, or you at least submitted the offer for them, even if they bought it sight unseen, right? So there was broker involvement. This would be the same exact thing. So it's really not any change whatsoever. We're just clarifying like what type of agreement this is. So next would be paragraph B. So this is the type of property that this applies to. So it automatically assumes single family residential, including condos and manufactured homes, or if checked, You could say that single family is excluded. You could say multi-family residential, 2 to 4 units. So if they're looking for a duplex, triplex, fourplex, you could add that in there. If they're looking for 5 or more, industrial, vacant land, commercial, I mean, this is simple, right? Whatever type of property you're helping them find, you can just check the box. If it's a house, you don't have to do anything. It already says single family. So like, you really don't have to do anything here if it's just a regular house that you're looking for. Next is the location. So you can put either counties or cities. What I am gonna do and what our team is gonna do is if it's here in Kern County or if we're in Fresno or Tulare or Los Angeles County, we're kind of expanding. If we're, depending on where we're at, we're just gonna put the county, and that's gonna encompass all of the little cities around us, right? Let's say you have a buyer in Bakersfield and they wanna see houses in Taft. Well, if you put Bakersfield specifically, this agreement doesn't matter, right? So I would just put the county, and that would encompass everything. So let's just say it is in Kern. So then I would just check the box for county, and I would just put Kern County. Boom. And now every house in Kern County applies. Properties excluded from representation. The only time I would see this being used is if they had already looked at other homes with like another agent maybe, and there was, you know, broker involvement on that other agent's job. So if they end up buying one of those homes, they're gonna use that agent, not you. But I don't see this getting used very often. But that would be one of the reasons you could use it, or they could just give you a list. All right, next is the big important part, right? This is what everyone is kind of freaking out about, this amount of compensation. So this is the part that is new, right? This is the biggest change in my opinion, and I think it's a good change, but this is the biggest change that I feel that has come from the settlement, right? Having to have a buyer sign a buyer representation agreement, which we've always done, but actually having a commission on it of this is how much we get paid, right? So the percent of the acquisition price, so the purchase price, and a dollar amount. So if you charge a transaction fee, if you're a team or your brokerage or whatever, if they charge some type of TC fee, transaction fee, whatever it is, you could put that there, which is what we would do. So let's just say I'm gonna work for 2% or 2.5% or 3% or whatever, right? Let's just say 3%. That's what we're gonna charge. And then whatever the TC fee is or the transaction fee, you put that there. Or if you want a dollar amount, you could just put a dollar amount there. Or, and this is where I get a lot of heat from, there's a box right here that says see attached compensation schedule. So if you go try to look up compensation schedule in Zip Forms or Glide, there isn't one. Right? So what this means is that your company or you might have your own sheet of what you charge, right? So you could have a price, you know, between these prices and these prices, it's this much, these prices. So I actually highly recommend doing this. We are looking at right now on my team, at least what we're gonna do, different packages, right? And so one thing that I have found, especially on the listing side, is that consumers like choices, and it also takes away a lot of the objection handling and the negotiations that kind of have to happen at the kitchen table, right? If you have different offerings, different things, and they cost different prices, well, then the buyer can just pick which one they want, right? And so you could create something like that. If it was, I've been like having people ask me like, can you do that? Like, what do you mean we can just write up our own form? Well, there's actually nothing legally requiring us to use car forms, right? Your broker might require you to use car forms, and it's a good idea to use them because they've all been created by lawyers and they're pretty agent and broker friendly, right? So it's definitely a good idea to use them, but sometimes there's reasons that you might have some sort of addendum. I mean, how many times like have you gone and wrote an offer on like an REO or a investor, like a big investment bank owns, you know, they're selling a bunch of houses, right? And then they have some type of 250-page rider in the attached documents that's basically just completely changes the entire contract, right? Like, that's very common. You can have your own contracts. Like, banks do it all the time. Like, the bank is not going to use CAR contracts. They're going to have their own stuff. Investment companies, they're going to have their own stuff. If it was illegal, or if that was not an option, CAR would not have put this box on the contract allowing you to do it, right? So talk to your broker. If you are going to do something like this, don't just go and do it, because everything has to be approved by the broker. But you can definitely do something like that, and I do highly recommend it. Having some sort of minimums and having some sort of packages, it will transform your business. So a little side note there. So if you were going to do that, you could check that box, and then at that point, I would probably switch over to that form and go over, okay, this is package A, package B, package C. You know, this one's 2, this one's 2.5, this one's 3, right? And each package comes with different things. Definitely recommend doing that, but like I said, not most people aren't going to do it. But it's one way that you can differentiate yourself and get more business. So next, payments received by the broker from sellers or others. So if the broker receives compensation from sellers or others for the broker's representation of the buyer, the amount shall be credited against the buyer's obligation. So that basically says, like, if the seller pays the commission, or anyone else pays the buyer broker commission, then that gets credited to the buyer, right? So that they don't actually have to pay it. So if you do an agreement and it's at 3%, and then the seller's offering 3%, and then the buyer doesn't have to pay the 3%, right? The seller paid it. Or if you do 3%, and then the seller is offering 2.5, and the buyer still wants to move forward and buy the house, well, then that 2.5 goes towards the 3. So then the buyer would only be responsible for that extra 0.5%, right? And so that would just be paid as a part of their closing cost. And people think that buyers won't do that. I disagree. I think if you provide enough value and enough reason for them to want to pay more, they will. So if you get only one thing from this entire training, is this. This is what I want you to hear. So commission, or rate of commission, is only a problem in the absence of value, right? So I sort of live by that when I think about, like, if I'm going to charge this much money, what would get people to feel okay doing that, right? You have to provide value, right? And so, one, you have to be able to articulate your value, but you actually need to provide real value. And so the only time you get objections about commission is if the buyer or the seller feel like they're not getting a good deal on this, like it's too much, right? But if you provide so many different things, so many different options, and they're like, oh my God, like, how much is this going to cost me? This seems like it's going to be a lot. Then you know you're doing a good job, right? So my mentor told me, if you're at a listing appointment and you're going over all the things that you do, and then at the end of the presentation, they're like, what is this going to cost me? You know you did a good job, because I've had people do that and think that it was going to cost way more than what we actually charged. And I was like, dang, I should have charged more. But that means you're providing so much value that the commission won't even be a problem. So if you get nothing else, get that. Commission is only a problem in the absence of value. So provide more value if you want to make more money. Okay, next. Continued right to payment for the broker-involved properties. So broker-involved properties. The continuation period shall be, you can put an amount of days right here. Oops, go the wrong way. So this is what we kind of call like the safety clause. Now it's the continuation period. What that means is, we've always had this in the listings. Now we have it on the buy side. If you go show a home to a buyer, and it's non-exclusive, so basically that means if they want to cancel this, it's canceled immediately. But if you go show a home to a buyer, and then the buyer loves it, and then you get a cancellation notice the next day, like, I don't want to work with you anymore, and then they go and buy that house with somebody else, you could still be entitled to receive your compensation for the broker involvement of showing that house. Now, there's a little caveat to that. You do have to provide them with a list of the homes that you've showed, but usually you text them the addresses or whatever. That is like the safety clause. So it keeps people from trying to not like have you do all the work and then cancel on you and then go buy it without you. So same thing on the listing side. If you procure all these buyers and then the seller says, you know what, I don't want to sell my house anymore, take it off the market and cancel it. And then you said, okay, cool, I'll cancel it, whatever. And then turn around and sell it to one of those buyers that you showed the home to, or that you came through the home while it was listed for sale. Well, if it's within the continuation period, then you are still owed that commission. And so you actually have to say how long that's going to be. So what I've always done, you can do whatever you want. I always put 90 days. That's just long enough to be like, if you want to sell your house, like you at least have to wait 90 days if you want to screw me over, you at least have to wait 90 days to do it. So I've seen 180 days. I've seen a lot of different ones. Cancellation rights and notice. So non-exclusive. So this is if you don't make it exclusive, if it's as it is, cancellation effective upon receipt, which is crazy to me. Like as soon as they tell you it's over, right? They're breaking up with you. Or you can check the box and put however many days after receipt. I would recommend doing this, and we are. So I'm going to put probably 48 hours, 2 days, right? Because if it is something to where like, if there was a problem and like you were unaware of it, like I would at least want the chance to remedy the situation before it's just flat out canceled on me, right? We may not be able to remedy it and we may just cancel it, right? But you might be able to save it, right? If there's some type of issue that maybe wasn't even a real issue, but they thought it was, and then you're able to just be like, oh no, this is what it really is, and explain something to them, and they're like, oh wow, I'm glad I didn't actually cancel. I would want that opportunity. And so that's why I'm not going to say make it a super long time, but we're going to do 2 days. So I would recommend doing that, but like I said, totally up to you. You don't have to put anything. And if you don't put anything, then it's as soon as you get it, it's over. If you do an exclusive agreement, it automatically is 30 days, and it doesn't give you the option to change that. So you could put 30 here too, I guess. Time to deliver personal and financial information within 5 calendar days. So that would be like your pre-quals, proof of funds. Other financial consideration. Buyer does not have sufficient funds to pay the broker. That's probably pretty common, especially first-time home buyers, especially. So you could check that box. Buyer intends to purchase with the following loan products, which does not allow the buyer to pay compensation to the broker. The only loan product that I'm aware of, and I'm not aware of all of them, but the only one that I'm aware of was VA. But VA has already came out and made that exception that allows VA buyers to pay their agents. Now, I don't think it was permanent. I think they're working on a permanent solution. But the last thing that I heard, which was not too long ago, is that they did make an exception for this because of these new changes. So there may be another type of loan out there. I have never used it, so I'm not aware of it. But maybe some of the loan brokers on here know about it. Other terms, you can write in other terms, whatever you want. Advisories, addenda. So compensation to brokers. So this just starts to talk about the different types of agreements. So non-exclusive representation, broker involvement. That's where we're going to start here. So compensation is payable only if there was broker involvement on the property. And down here it says what broker involvement is. So all this right here. Exclusive representation is based on buyer acquisition. So if exclusive is checked and paragraph 2A2 is initialed and paragraph 15, you actually have to do this on the last page also. The broker is entitled to compensation if the buyer acquires property during the representation period or any extension with or without broker involvement. The place that I see this happening the most, if you are going to do exclusive agreements, would be like new construction. Because it's, even though we tell buyers, like, hey, if you're going to go to new construction, let me know. I got to go with you. Like, how many times do they, like, tell you, oh, hey, I went and checked out these new homes, and they signed me up, right? And you're like, oh, crap. So some builders are cool, and they'll, you know, they'll let you still do it. Other builders, they try not to let you do it. So this is where I see that becoming, like, important, I guess, but really not. Even if another broker is also entitled to be paid, right? So they may have to pay two agents. If they had someone else go show the house, they got to pay that guy. Plus, you had an exclusive, so now they have to pay you also. So make sure they know what they're doing if you're going to make it exclusive. So buyer includes any person or entity other than the broker related to the buyer, or who in any manner acts on behalf of the buyer to acquire the property described in 2B. So I've had this happen where on listings, especially where the seller cancels and then sells it to the buyer that you had, sells it to the brother or something. It says, well, I didn't sell it to the person you found, I sold it to their brother. That's a different buyer, so I don't have to pay you commission. I've literally had that happen more than once. It doesn't work, but people try to do it. So this flat out is just saying any related entity or person also, so that they kind of can't do that. All right, what is broker involvement? So this whole section, number 4, describes what broker involvement is. So wherever used in the agreements means any of the following. So the broker was physically shown or physically entered and was shown the property by the broker. The broker showed the property to the buyer virtually. The broker submitted to the seller a signed written offer from the buyer to acquire, lease, exchange, or obtain an option on the property. So those are simple, right? Those are easy. Like, you showed them the house, you did a virtual tour, you wrote an offer, like, no shit, that's broker involvement. What else is broker involvement? So broker performed a market analysis related to the property or reviewed property-specific documents or disclosures with the buyer. So if the buyer wants you to run comps or wants you to get more information about the property and you go do all of that and then you go over that with the buyer, that is broker involvement on this property. Next, the property was introduced to the buyer by the broker or one for which the broker acted on behalf of buyer. However, merely sending the buyer a list of properties shall not be deemed broker involvement without documented action on the part of the broker analyzing the property for the buyer specifically, or assisting the buyer in the potential acquisition of the property, or communicating with the seller or seller's agent regarding buyer's potential acquisition of the property. So let's break that down a little bit, because that was a lot. So you can't just send a list of homes, right? Like, if that was the case, then I would just put every single buyer that we have on a drip email that sends them listings of every single house in the entire county every single day, and then boom, I have broker involvement for any house that they buy. So that does not work, so you can't do that. You actually have to do some stuff for the buyer on these properties. So what are those things? Right, so shall not be deemed broker involvement without documented action. So what that says is that's not broker involvement if you don't have documented action on the part of the broker doing these things. So if you do have documented, documented action on your part, then it is broker involvement. So you actually have to, like before, analyze the property, right? Specifically, like that house, and going over the buyer. If you actually assist the buyer in the potential acquisition of the property, or you communicate with the seller or the seller's agent regarding buyer's potential acquisition of the property. So what does that mean? It means you called the listing agent and tried to negotiate an offer or got information about the property, right? Because your buyer was interested in buying that specific property. If you have that documented, like phone records or whatever your CRM is, if you make your calls through there, you do have documented action in order to prove that yes, I did do that, and so now there is broker involvement. All right, next. That's pretty much it on here. It talks about the continuation of the right of compensation. So I talked about what that was already, a little safety period. Timing, it's when the transaction is completed. Or actually, no, this is where problems I see happening. So on the listing side, this has been an issue. And on the buy side, now I see this like, okay. So upon completion of the resulting transaction, you're entitled to compensation. So basically you close escrow, you get paid, right? Everyone knows that. The next one, this is how listings work, and now this is how buyers work too. If the acquisition is prevented by default of the buyer, like most of the time, the deal blows up because the buyer backs out, right? Now, they may be allowed to do it underneath their contingencies, right? But what happens if they remove all their contingencies and then they decide that they still don't want to buy the house? Now they're in default, they're in breach of contract. Before, the buyer's agent was just out of luck, right? The seller would have to go after the buyer, and how often does that happen? Like never. So then you're kind of just out of luck at that point. Now, this is saying if the buyer defaults and just, backs out of the deal and they didn't do certain things like they were supposed to do contractually, they breached a contract, they still have to pay the commission. Now, this is a legal thing, right? Probably not going to happen just like that, in my experience. Like, there's like a lot of steps to go through to actually get it, and it may not even be worth it to do it, right? Depending on the size. But what if it's $1 million property and the commission was, 2.5%, 3%? It's $25,000, $30,000, and the buyer just totally defaults and backs out of the deal. Like, are you going to go for that? Like, probably, right? That's a big chunk of money. So this is where I see issues actually happening, is buyers are notorious for not performing, and then the deal blows up. Well, technically, they're still supposed to pay commission if they do that now. So we'll see what happens with that. I'm not going to say it's going to go one way or the other, but just looking at this and knowing how this has always been the way for sellers, it's an area where there could be issues. All right, let's just keep on moving down. Most of this stuff now, it's just all the explanations of the stuff we just went over, so we've already gone over it, but you can read through it all. I highly advise that you do read through all of it at least once. Next, okay, the last page, so page 5 of 5, this is the last page. Now, I didn't understand why they put this on the last page also, but it makes sense later on in the next form that we're going to go over. So if you do exclusive representation, the buyer also has to initial on this page. So paragraph 15, page 5, if they don't check the box on page 1 and initial the box on page 15, which seems really complicated, it's not exclusive. So if you're going to do exclusive, make sure you do the box up top and then you do the initial down below. Okay, next, the compensation, confirmation of compensation. So you also have to put the commission that you're charging on the last page as well. So the reason you do this is because you may have to send part of your buyer rep agreement with the offer, or if the seller requests it, which listing agents, listen to me, you need to do this in order to protect your sellers. Like if I'm a seller, we'll go over that later, but you need to do this. Like you need to request page 5 of the buyer representation agreement. If they don't have one, your seller doesn't have to pay the commission. So if you're a listing agent and you're doing a good job representing your seller, you better ask for this. If you don't, you're doing a massive disservice to your client. So it needs to be here as well. And then it's the same as all the other contracts, entity buyers, sign date, print, all the information, and that's that. So then just all the disclosures are now down below. So I'm not going to go over the disclosures. We've had those forever. This form is just what I want to go over. So next, we're going to go over the RPA, because there's only one thing I want to talk about in the RPA. We've had the RPA forever. Everyone pretty much knows how to use that. But there's a certain portion that no one's really ever used, because we didn't have to, but now we do. So page 1 is this, right? We've all seen this before. This is all the same as it's always been. Page 2, so you guys, if you're not totally new, will remember that the seller credit section, let me bring this down a little bit. This didn't used to be here. That was added like a year ago maybe, where you could actually put the amount of seller credit that you want for closing costs. So everyone started, using that like they should for their closing costs. It even says over at the end, like seller credit to be applied to closing costs. Then they added this section right here. So G3, seller agrees to pay obligation of buyer to compensate buyer's broker under a separate agreement, CAR form SPBB. So that's what we're going to go over next. But what I want to make clear is that if your buyer is going to ask the seller to cover part of or the entire commission that they owe you, which I assume they're going to, you need to check this box. And then you have to do that form with it and send it with the offer. If your buyer is just going to pay you outright, like they have no problem doing that, then you don't need to ask the seller to do it, right? And so you don't need to check that box. But I don't see that happening a ton. I think everything is going to kind of remain the same. And I'll explain why later. But you need to check this box if you want the seller to cover the buyer broker's compensation. So that's the only thing I wanted to explain on this, right? We didn't have to do that before. Now you do, because they got rid of the cooperating broker agreement. So like if you were working on an out-of-town deal, you weren't entitled to the compensation in the MLS. If you weren't a member of their MLS, you had to send the cooperating broker agreement. And that form no longer exists. So you can't do that. So now you have to do this. Okay. Or your buyer just pays it. Let's get out of here. Now let's go over that SPBB form. So this is an easy one. It's a little short one-pager, but it's super important, right? It starts out just like every other contract, dated. You need to put the date of the purchase agreement. Has all the parties involved. Okay, paragraph 1. Seller payment to buyer's broker. So subject to paragraph 1B below, the seller agrees to pay the buyer's broker whatever percent, so just say I have 2.5 right there, 2.5% of the purchase price, or if checked, you could do a dollar amount if you want to do a dollar amount. Next, B, go up a little bit. So maximum seller payment obligation. So this is the most that the seller is going to have to pay. So the seller shall only be obligated to pay the buyer's broker the lesser of 1, the amount specified in paragraph 1A, which is paragraph 1A, that much, right? The lesser of either that much or 2, the amount the buyer is obligated to pay the buyer's broker pursuant to their buyer representation agreement. And if applicable, less any amount that others have agreed to pay the buyer's broker. So they're going to pay whichever one is less, what they wrote right there or what the buyer representation agreement says. So after that, it says if there is no buyer representation agreement, then the seller has no obligation to pay the buyer's broker. So if I get an offer, like no, people are not going to send their buyer representation agreement, like most of the time. So if that's not there, and I'm a seller, which sellers aren't going to do this. So as a listing agent, like you need to know this because this is what the seller should be thinking and should be doing. If I'm the seller and I say, okay, I'm going to pay either this amount or this amount, but I don't know what this amount is yet, and I'm going to pay the lesser of the two, well, how much does the buyer rep agreement say? Maybe that says 2. Maybe I'm going to pay less, right? Or maybe they don't have one at all, and I don't have to pay anything, right? So I'm going to make sure that I get a copy of that buyer representation agreement, right? To see, okay, well, if they're putting 2.5 here, I wonder what the buyer rep says. I need to see what that says also. So if you're a listing agent, this is what you need to be doing. So buyer represents that as of the date signed by the buyer below, the buyer has a signed representation with the buyer's broker, and the amount specified in paragraph 1 is no more than the amount the buyer is obligated to pay the buyer's broker. So this is like the buyer promising that I promise it's not more than that, or it's not less than that. So, and it has to be as of this date. So like if they sign this and then you request the portion of the buyer rep later and then it's signed after, well then it's no good because it has to be as of this date. This portion right here, paragraph 3, this is what I want to talk about with listing agents. So, delivery of buyer representation agreement. So the buyer authorizes buyer's broker and, if applicable, escrow holder upon request, so not automatically, upon request, to deliver to the seller or the seller's broker a copy of the portion of the buyer rep agreement identifying the compensation the buyer has agreed to pay the buyer's broker, such as the last page of CAR form BRBC, which is the buyer rep, right? So page 5. That's why they put the commission on the last page again, and if it's exclusive or non-exclusive. So you don't send the whole buyer rep. You can just send the portion that shows the commission, right? But you might not want to send all that other stuff, like the box that's checked that says the buyer can't afford to do it, right? So you might want to just send the amount of compensation. So you can just send page 5. So if I'm a listing agent, and I've already done this because I've received these already recently. So I've already requested these pages, and they'll send them. That way I can identify which one's less and actually confirm for my client that they're not getting, screwed over somehow. Cool. And that's it. That's all this form is. So not that big a deal, right? Super easy. All right, lastly, we're going to go over the listing agreement. So I've taken some heat on this one, but I don't care. Okay, let's find the actual listing agreement. I'm not going to go all the disclosures and all that stuff. Okay, so I think this new listing agreement is actually so much easier than the previous one that they had. They just changed it. It looks a lot more like the buyer rep or the purchase agreement now. So it's actually a lot easier to read. So the same thing, you put all the property information, the APN number. Don't forget this, like agents always forget this. Listing period. So this listing period not to exceed 24 months. So beginning, that's going to be the day that it starts, that they sign it, and then you can put your end date, whenever that's going to be. So whether you do 30 days, 90 days, 6 months, a year, 2 years is the max. Whatever you do, like that's where you put it. Listing price, that's where you put the list price. Super easy, right? If it's a mobile home or a probate, you check one of these boxes and it adds those forms, right? Super easy. You've always had to do that. Now it's just right there for you. Compensation. Okay, so this is the changes, right? So compensation to the seller's broker, only the seller's side of the transaction. So then you put the percentage of the list price and a dollar amount if you're going to charge some sort of transaction fee on the list side also. Or, again, see attached compensation schedule, which I also recommend doing this, but it's totally up to your broker whether or not you're going to be able to do this, and they should actually be providing you with this stuff. If they're not, you could probably try to make one of your own, but then you still have to get it approved, obviously. So don't just go out there and do this. Like, make sure wherever you work, you're allowed to do this. Next, additional compensation to the seller's broker if the buyer is unrepresented, right? So think about, like, you did an open house on your listing and you also found the buyer, right? How much are you going to get paid for having that buyer as well? Or you got a sign call from the sign in the yard, or let's say you're buying leads, right? You got a Zillow lead and they came in, they weren't represented, And so you were the listing agent. Now you're this is what dual agency. So this is where the dual agency part comes in, right? So you can put however much you're going to make there, right? And then a dollar amount, and then also attach C compensation schedule. So I'm going to actually show you guys my compensation schedule. So this is my big secret. It's not even a secret. I'm just going to show you. It's like the same thing. I just added a third section that I think should be here anyways. California, by the way, is the only state that's removed the buyer portion of the commission. They've completely taken the seller's ability away to even have that in writing up front, which I don't know why they did that. Like, there's a lot of speculation online about what's going on. But so far, California is the only one that's done it, to my knowledge. And I've checked with my friends in other states. So, continuation of the right. So that's the same thing, right? That is the safety clause. So you can put 90 days, 180 days, whatever you want there. That's the main change. Everything else is pretty much the same. It's just in a different place, right? So lease, liened items, included, excluded items, smart home features that are included or excluded. Property will be marketed in the following MLS, so primary, others. So you just put whatever MLS it's going to be in. They can say that they don't want photographs in the marketing. I actually had one of these yesterday. Timing of presentation, everything's the same. The contingency, so if they're gonna, sell this house and buy another one, so it's contingent, you got to check that box. It adds the SPRP form, so you got to use that. I'm not going to teach the kindergarten stuff in this one. I want to just go over these big changes. Key safe, lockbox, they can opt out of those things. So I think this is easier. Like, they just kind of put everything right here on these pages. You just check all these little boxes. Before, you had to like search for this stuff almost. If you have your own addendums or anything like that, you can put those in here too. And then everything else is basically the same. So it's also, this one's still 7 pages. Okay, so let's talk about this. This is why everyone's freaking out, right? The compensation on the listing side. So this is going to be from experience. I've talked to agents, or I've seen agents say, oh my God, I went on a listing appointment and it's so confusing and the sellers don't know what's happening. I can tell you from experience that, this year, since this has all kind of happened, that I have not had a single seller tell me that they are not going to offer the commission still for the buyer's agent. And just for a little clarity, like, I've been on 82 listing appointments this year so far. And so that's not like I know people that do way more, but that's a decent enough number where I think if this was going to be a big issue, that at least half of them would have objected to it or say, I want to do less. I haven't had a single person do that. So I don't think anything's going to change. We're still charging the same amount that we were before all this happened, and we're still going to do it the exact same way. Now, how the marketing works, that's yet to be seen. But I haven't had any objection. As long as I explain it to the client, and I've been explaining this to clients for a long time, ever since it kind of came out. Now, I've been asked about it. Like, they've said, hey, can you, what's going on with that? I heard something on the news about it, right? And that's totally fine. That's what we're for. And so when I go through all of this and I explain, I explain the listing change is really not that big. The buy side change is actually the bigger change. And how, it's more paperwork. They totally get it. And they're like, oh, okay, well, that's kind of stupid. And I'm like, yeah, I know. And then they're like, yep, whatever it is, that we initially said, they just go for it. I've not had a single person tell me they don't want to do it. And so if you have, you might not be explaining it right. And so just think about that. I haven't had a single person in 82 listing appointments tell me otherwise. That when I explain it, the way that I explain it to them and the way that I show them that you should still do this, right? And they're going to ask for it anyways, and they might not buy your house if you don't. They're like, yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I totally expected to have to do that anyways. So that's why I don't think there's going to be any massive change to the way we practice and the way we do things. It's just the paperwork changed. And so that's it. I'll show you an example of a compensation schedule. I don't care. You can rip this off and copy it if you want. It's nothing spectacular. Let me find it really fast. I didn't expect to show you guys this, so let me find it. Here we go. get this shared. Okay. So everyone's going to hate me for showing you guys this, but compensation schedule. I just copied what the listing agreement says. So I didn't make stuff up, really. Like, I just copied what was already in the agreement and then just put it on my own little form, and I put my logo on it. So, following terms and conditions are hereby incorporated and made a part of this residential listing agreement dated on the property known as the address, which is seller, right? Same thing. I just copy and pasted. I put the notification for like the real estate commissions, right? Like, I put that on there too. I just copy and pasted that off the listing agreement. Paragraph 1, I just copy and pasted what the listing agreement already has, right? Compensation to the seller's broker for representing the seller. Seller agrees to pay the seller's broker as compensation for services, either blank % of the listing price, or if a purchase or the dollar amount and whatever. I just copied it, right? You can't tell me that that is wrong or that that's not legal. Like, it's literally what the contract already says. Number 2, this is the section for dual agency, right? Compensation to seller's broker for representing buyer if buyer is unrepresented. So additional compensation to the seller's broker if the buyer is unrepresented shall be blank % or blank dollar amount, right? Same thing it already says. The third section is what I added. And I copied the verbiage. And I put this in here because I've been doing this long enough to where I know that the worst thing that can happen in a real estate transaction is a surprise, right? Like, setting expectations, especially as a listing agent, is the name of the game. If you can go over all of the potential outcomes and all of the potential solutions with your client before they happen, when anything happens, they're like, oh yeah, Ryan already told me about that. Like, it's not that big a deal. But when something happens that they weren't expecting, that is when you run into issues, and that's when you have headaches. So get better at setting proper expectations, and you'll have a lot less headaches. You'll close a lot less deals. So that's all this is for. It's just to set expectations. Compensation to the buyer's broker. So I put a little 2 boxes, right? Broker is, check that box, or is not, check that box. This is for the sellers that actually don't want to offer any type of commission. Haven't had it happen, but it's there. So let's just say they check the box. Is authorized to compensate with or cooperate with and compensate a buyer's broker. If authorized, the amount offered to buyer's broker as compensation will be blank % of the purchase price or a dollar amount. So this is so that when all these agents are going to start calling, hey, are they offering any type of commission? Well, if you just use a standard listing agreement, how can you say what they're offering? Because you actually have nothing in writing, right? Like, in real estate, if it's not in writing, like, it don't matter, right? So you have to have everything in writing. And so that's why I put this third section, just to make sure that I have at least something in writing that the seller is authorizing me to tell the agent how much they're going to offer, right? So they can't say, well, you told me, I told you this, but then you told them that. I'm like, well, there was nothing in writing. They didn't sign anything. Like, who's to say that there wasn't a miscommunication or something, right? But if you have it here and they signed that piece of paper and said, yep, you can say 2.5 or 2 or 1 or whatever it's going to be, like, then I'm allowed to do that. So they sign, date, you sign, date. Like, you can totally screenshot this, copy, paste it. But again, don't do it without your broker's permission. So that is my training for today. Sorry it took so long. If you have any questions, you can send me a message. Just reach out to me. I will totally help you, whether you work for me or not. I don't really care. I'm just here to kind of like help everybody get better, because I want to see this industry get a lot more solid, and I want to see it continue, and I want agents to be professionals and like really know what they're doing. Like, when agents know what they're doing, then things just go a lot smoother. So that's it for the video. Hope you liked it. Let me know if you have questions.